how do people melt the fat, Dr. Lee? We're living in a time now where half the population almost is not just overweight, but obese. How do we solve this?
There's a lot to unpack in that question. And I like to start by basically saying that my book, Eat to Beat Your Diet, the title's a little bit of a trick title because it's not a diet book. It's kind of an anti-diet book to say how we can actually improve our metabolism, fight body fat, and actually elevate our health, which is the real goal, our inner health, without ever having to go on a diet. So saying that, I can tell you that the whole idea about body fat, it's loaded. The word fat is actually a real loaded term. In our society, it's associated with a lot of negative connotations, right? When you think about fat, it's usually something not that you don't want. Even if you walk by the butcher section in the grocery store, you see that rind of fat around a steak. Yeah, you'd rather not have that, right? But it turns out, and this is what I write about, that there's a new science to the body that gives us new appreciation of what fat actually does and how that connects to our metabolism in ways that we never thought actually existed. So that fat itself is not a harmful entity when you've got too much and you got obesity. It is harmful. But up until that point, actually fat, believe it or not, is a human organ. It's an organ as important as your pancreas, your liver, your spleen, your heart, your lungs. And it actually fulfills very, very important purposes for our everyday health connected to our metabolism. And most people think about fat as something that grows on you. And when you see it, you don't like it. So we all went through this. We've all gone through this, right? Get up in the morning, take a shower, step out of the shower, out of the corner of your eye, you see in the mirror a lump or a bump that you don't want to be there, right? That's what makes you think about body fat. But actually, most people don't think about the fact that body fat actually existed before we were born. And that leads us, I'm a scientist, so I like to ask origin stories. Where does fat come from? And fat starts in the womb.
Wow, it starts in the womb. And certainly the fat that we are packaged with in utero, it's not bad in any way. It's probably is performing a vital function for life.
Yeah, let me explain that to you. So when your mom's egg met your dad's sperm and they got together, formed a ball of cells that's going to be the future you, right? When they started to make tissue that will ultimately be your organs, the first tissue that got laid down were your blood vessels, because every organ needs circulation. So that gets laid down first, right? So this is like building a house. What goes down first? Well, blood vessels get created when we're created. Second tissue that gets laid down are nerves. And why that? Because every organ needs signaling to be able to tell them what to do. And so your nerves send those signals, right? Seems pretty fun. Like if you were creating a blueprint of a body, those would be the two things that you do. And that's actually what happens. Third tissue that gets laid down, surprisingly, is fat, body fat. And they're called, the fat cells are called adipose cells. Adipose is another word for fat. And they actually form around blood vessels, kind of like bubble wrap. If you had a blood vessel and you were to wrap bubble wrap around it, that's what fat looks like. Now, what does fat do? And why is it wrapped around? Because fat cells, adipose cells, actually are fuel tanks. Fat actually stores fuel, and the fuel is absorbed from the blood, gets into the fuel tank. And so that makes total sense why they're actually located that way, right? So then after that, the rest of our organs start to build all around that. This just tells you how important fat is from the get-go. Fast forward to 9 months. Baby is born. What do you call a beautiful, healthy baby? A fat, pudgy, chubby baby, right? Big fat cheeks, round tummy. Think about it. Like their arms and legs are like those balloons in a circus where they make poodles out of it.
Literally,
the clown makes it, right? Like literally, they look like that, right? So there's something great, important, and healthful about fat in utero, very important for survival, and also when we're born, right? But we don't tend to think about fat in that context. By sort of counter distinction, if you actually saw a baby when they were born and they had chiseled cheekbones like a fashion model and they had thin arms and long, thin legs, like on a runway, you would be taken aback. You'd go, man, there's something wrong with that baby.
Yeah.
Right? And you'd be right. Okay. So a fatless baby, a thin baby, lean baby is not well. Okay. So this is my kind of reset for you to rethinking body fat is actually one of the things that I write about. Like we need to have a complete reconceptualization and a new understanding of what fat actually does.
Yeah. So what is the fat doing for the baby during that stage of life?
Okay. What the fat is doing for the baby is actually a continuum of what fat does for our healthy bodies for the rest of our lives. And so this is sort of the goodness of fat that's hidden beneath the kind of the perception of the badness and the actual badness. So I'm not denying that excess body fat is harmful. It's very harmful. We're going to get into that in a second. But before we talk about the harms, it's so easy to jump into the demonization in the health and wellness space of things. I'm a scientist. I'm a doctor. Let's talk about the good stuff first so we can understand, when does good become bad? And that way we can know how to restore the good, right?
I'm with you.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, fat, as I mentioned to you, is an organ, and it performs multiple functions. As an organ, what kind of organ is it? Turns out to be an endocrine organ. Produces hormones like your thyroid, like your adrenal glands, okay, like your pancreas. And that's an amazing thing because we don't normally think about our fat as an organ. Most organs are just a chunk of something connected to tubes. Well, fat's actually a kind of organ that is just distributed throughout our body. And what does the fat produce as a endocrine organ? It produces hormones, 13 different hormones that are known currently.
Wow.
All right. And 3 of them I want to mention because I think it's important just to give some examples of what this hormonal function of fat actually is. Remember, we're talking about health. We're talking about healthy fat, healthy body from baby to end of life. The first hormone is leptin, made by fat. And many of you may have heard about leptin. Leptin is sort of the appetite controller, right? More leptin, less appetite, less leptin, more appetite. So it's kind of like a volume switch for your hunger, all right? And that's important because when your fat actually is controlling your brain to go search for food so you can load up on fuel because the fat cells are fuel tanks. So you can kind of see how this all starts to fit together now, all right? Now, fat. So that's one hormone. Most people may have heard of leptin before. Another hormone that people that have not heard about, or at least very few people have heard about, is called adiponectin. Adiponectin is another fat hormone, okay? It's a very important one, and it's completely concerned with helping your body gain energy from the food that you eat, all right? In fact, it works as a partner with insulin, which is a hormone that helps energy. So let me tell you, if I were to take a vial of your blood, send it to a regular hospital lab to analyze your hormones. Your adiponectin levels and mine would be 1,000 times higher than any other hormone in your body.
Wow.
Higher than testosterone, higher than thyroid hormone, higher than cortisol, anything else. Now, why is that? It's because adiponectin partners with insulin to make sure that the energy that you have from the food that we eat is efficiently absorbed into our bodies. That's our metabolism. It's part of our metabolism. So good, healthy levels of fat perform this function to bring in energy along with insulin. It's very, very important as a foundation for our energy. Now, there's a third hormone I want to mention. It's called resistin. Resistin is like the brake to adiponectin. That's the gas pedal. Gas pedal goes down. Let's absorb lots of energy fast, hard. Resistant is like, whoa, let's put on the brake here, a little bit less. All right. So, most systems in the body are about balance. Okay. Leptin up, less appetite. Leptin down, more appetite. Adiponectin down, you actually have more efficient energy absorption. Resistin down, the brake, actually pull back on energy absorption. Makes sense because we want to fine tune our metabolism from day to day. So that's one very important thing that normal healthy fat does. It's a setup in the womb. The babies start to do it right away, and it continues throughout our lives. This is how we normally function. Now, a couple of other things that fat does as well, besides being an endocrine organ. It's a cushion. Now, most people think that fat might be a like insulation, kind of like blubber on a whale. No, it's more of a cushion. Think about fat like peanuts that you might pack something you're shipping across the country in.
Yeah.
All right. If we had no body fat, all right, and the most important body fat for the cushion actually is inside our frame, packed inside our belly. If you had no fat and you tripped on a rug and you fell on the ground, your organs would burst open. So fat actually has sort of a cushion role as well. Now, the other thing that fat actually has a very important role on that's fascinating is that it's a space heater. And a space heater, so this isn't just passive, like the blubber is just passive. The cushion is kind of passive, but this is an active function, just like the hormone. Instead of releasing hormones, it releases heat.
Wow.
Now, let me explain to you, not all fat generates heat. So the new science of the metabolism tells us, broadly speaking, there's two kinds of fat in our body. There's white fat, which is jiggly. The white fat that's under the skin, is meaning close to the skin. We call it subcutaneous. That's the stuff you see under your arm, under your chin. That's the muffin top, all right, around your thighs and your butt. That's the stuff that most people don't like, want to get rid of. And I have no problem with it. That's a good thing. If you feel good by streamlining your body, go for it.
Yeah.
That's an important thing. And too much of it is also bad for you. But the other thing that's really important is that another kind of jiggly fat is actually packed inside your body. That's the visceral fat we were talking about earlier. Now, visceral fat doesn't care if you have a big sized body like a weightlifter in the Olympics or a thin body like a javelin thrower in the Olympics. It can grow inside. And that fat is sort of like the peanuts for packing that we talked about, except when it starts to grow excessively, it goes from being a packing peanuts into turning into a baseball glove that wraps around your organs and chokes your organs.
Ooh.
And it can happen whether you're apparently thin or you, obviously, if you actually have excess weight. All right, that's white fat. Both not so good for you. Visceral fat, deadly.
So both the subcutaneous fat and the visceral fat are white fat.
Correct.
Got it.
Right. Now, the other kind of fat that's not white fat, the other kind is called brown fat. You're starting to see and hear about brown fat, and you see it online, you see some advertising for it. A lot of people in the weightlifting world and bodybuilding world talk about brown fat. I'm not coming from that sector. I'm coming at this really as a scientist and a doctor. And let me tell you something about brown fat. It's absolutely fascinating because only recently have we discovered that humans have not just a little brown fat, but a lot of brown fat. And brown fat is different than white fat because it's not jiggly. It's not lumpy, bumpy, jiggly. It's not under your arm. And it's definitely not subcutaneous. You can't see it. It's not under the skin. Brown fat is paper thin, wafer thin. Okay. So Think about it. Fat as thin?
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
That seems to be a contradiction in terms. But yeah, brown fat are thin sheets and it's not close to the skin when you can't see it. It's close to the bone, all right? It's deep. And it actually is plastered around our neck, plastered underneath our breastbone, around like a girdle around our chest, under our arms, a little bit in the back, a little bit in your belly, scattered, okay? And that fat has space heater function.
Wow.
It's like a nuclear plant that can fire up when it's stimulated in order to burn energy. So it really actually activates your metabolism. And as it does that, it needs fuel, right? The space heater needs power, it needs gas, it needs to get fuel. Where does it draw the fuel? Where does brown fat draw the fuel from? Brown fat draws its fuel to burn from white fat. So brown fat is good fat that can fight white fat when it's bad fat. Fat versus fat.
Wow.
Another totally interesting thing that you can actually think about fighting fat with fat.
It's like a civil war happening in your own body.
Yeah, exactly. Except that they all started out being friends and all started out creating kind of a peaceful society.
Yeah, well, they should, ideally we'll return to that. So how do we then, you've mentioned what brown fat does, and you mentioned where it tends to habitate in the body. How do we stoke that fire? And how do we encourage its proliferation if it's so good for us? Can we even do that?
Yeah. Well, look, I want to tell you a little story about how brown fat in humans was discovered because it's so fascinating. I think that there's so much to be learned about the origin stories and the history of things because it just gives us a better appreciation that this isn't just a trend or a fad. This is something real that was discovered over time. Okay. So in the 1700s, there was a a naturalist, kind of somebody who studies nature named Conrad Gessner. He lives in Switzerland, and he was really interested in understanding animals and the anatomy of animals. So he was actually taking a look at a rodent that lived in the Swiss mountains that would hibernate, and he would catch one and dissect it. And, like they do in the old school days, they would draw the organs. And he found one organ that was between the shoulder blades, and he didn't know what it was. Brown colored, but didn't look like anything else that was out there. Well, fast forward, actually, a professor at UCLA took a look at that, over time, and started to really, there were more sophisticated lab tools, and said, you know what, that brown thing actually is made out of fat. And the idea of this is that they thought maybe it was something only in hibernating animals. So then they started to find it in bats and other kind of animals that actually hibernate. Okay. And they said, well, I wonder if it's in humans. Fast forward a little bit further, they found it in babies, human babies. You know where they found it in human babies? Right. Just like in this rodent in Switzerland, they found it between the shoulder blades. When babies are born, there's a little lump of brown fat that actually is there.
Wow.
Now, what did they figure out the brown fat did in hibernating animals is that when the animals are surviving over the winter, they need a space heater. So brown fat fires up and keeps them warm. All right. Now, what about human babies? Why do we have that? Is it a relic of evolution? Look, babies are born in delivery suites. We can put them into incubators. They're in warm homes. Why do we need them? So the idea that was originally thought is, it's just maybe vestigial, like an appendix, all right, which we know now it actually has a function because it actually harbors gut microbiome as well.
Right.
All right, so you don't want to or your tonsils, right? Like people used to say, let's whip out the tonsils, whip out the appendix. No. Like that, they're actually important components of our body. All right, so brown fat in babies. Is it vestigial? No. Actually, it serves a function. And what they've found is that, and they thought, well, maybe when the babies grow up, the brown fat just goes away, just kind of melts away. Turns out that researchers in Boston were once looking at a woman who came in with a tumor in her chest. And they did a biopsy, looked at the biopsy, and it was made out of fat. Okay. And in fact, it was called a hibernoma because it resembled the hibernating animal's mass organ.
Wow.
Okay. Oma meaning tumor. And it wasn't malignant. All right. But what they thought was really interesting is that when they scanned it using a PET scan, which captures metabolic energy, in other words, what you need to generate heat, this baby in this tumor, this little tumor, hibernoma, this brown fat tumor, lit up like a nuclear engine.
Wow.
Okay. And it was only because we had PET scannings at that time that it could actually even be figured out. So the researcher that did this in Boston, Ronald Kahn, actually went back and said, I wonder if this signal exists in other PET scans, metabolic scans in other people. So he went back and dug up thousands of other scans that were done and found, actually, there are people that are showing this brown fat throughout their chest, and we just missed it.
Wow.
Like it was there, but we weren't looking for it, so we just kind of ignored the signal. But not everybody had it. So what he then did is went back and said, you know what? It was in hibernating animals that they saw it way back when, in the old days, right? Conrad Gessner. So he said, let's go back and match the PET scans with the temperature of the day in which the scan was taken. So we went back to the meteorological record and found every time a patient had a PET scan that showed brown fat in the body, it was on a cold day in the wintertime. And on warm weather days, it was cooler. So this space heating fat function that lives in adults as well as babies, as well as hibernating animals, truly has a physiological function to help generate heat. It is a space heater.
Wow.